Okay.
So good afternoon. It is Wednesday, November 1st, and we are going to be discussing The Wizard of Lies.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks for showing up. I hope you were able to access the movie and find it. And if not, you can still watch it some other time. But unfortunately, there will be spoilers. So if you haven't seen it yet. So this
Although
movie
it is a true story that I think we all know.
Yeah, I mean, I hope even though we all know it, that there's some things that either jog your memory or that you didn't know at the time. Um, and of course, even though it is, as we would say, based on a true story, that doesn't mean that every single thing that happens in this movie is uh, truth. It's a story of the truth, let's say. Um, so this was made in 2017, so pretty fresh. A lot of times movies that are based on something from history are, they made movies about the Dreyfus Affair, for example, which happens in the 1800s. Of course, was made in the 1940s and 50s. So it's sometimes there's more time for history to sort of absorb the lessons of a particular thing. So from 2010 to 2017, that's pretty close in time, right? The movie is directed by Barry Levinson, who we have seen another one of his movies. He was the director of Bugsy that we saw in our last go round of Real Jewish Classics. He's made quite a number of pretty high profile movies. The first one that I remember seeing was Diner, which I believe was his first movie, which came out in the 1970s. Some of you may know Avalon, which I've thought about showing. We haven't gotten around to it yet. He was also the director of some really critically acclaimed movies like Rain Man and Good Morning Vietnam. He's got quite a resume actually in terms of filmmaking. Perhaps this was something of a comeback in a sense for him. He got his start in Hollywood working with Mel Brooks. Actually, he was a comedy writer, and he is one of the screenplay writers on some Mel Brooks movies, High Anxiety and Silent Movie. He also made the movie The Natural with Robert Redford. So really a great Hollywood career. This movie was nominated for 4 Emmys. It was a made-for-television movie. It was nominated in the category of Best Acting, and for both Robert De Niro and for Michelle Pfeiffer, and also for Best Movie Made for Television. And there's a category in the Emmys that doesn't exist in the Oscars, which is Best Casting in general. So for the whole cast of the movie. So the casting director received an Emmy nomination. So, and I do think the performances here are pretty extraordinary, really, across the board. But Michelle Pfeiffer stands out, perhaps, as I think she's really good in this. Besides the accent, I mean, just the range of emotion. The scene when she gets the call from one of her sons who hasn't spoken to her a long time, and he's just calling to tell her that the other one has committed suicide. The crying actually appears off screen, but I think it's an extraordinary moment. She is perhaps more beautiful than the character she's playing, but she really does an amazing job in this. And I think Robert De Niro is also excellent as Bernie Madoff in the movie, in a much more subtle kind of role. It sneaks up on you a bit, I think, and of course, I don't have to really tell you much about either of their illustrious careers, but continuing a theme that we've noticed right along is Jewish characters played by non-Jewish actors, right? Neither Michelle Pfeiffer nor Robert De Niro, nor either of the characters playing their sons are Jewish actors. Alessandro Nivola plays the son Mark, and Nathan Darrow plays Andrew. Both of their faces may look familiar. I mean, they've both been character actors and appeared in other things. If anyone watched so that's Alessandro Nivola, who plays Mark. He's got roles in movies like American Hustle with Christian Bale and Selma from a few years ago. More recently, he's in a movie called Amsterdam. And some of it, from a Jewish perspective, you may have run into him if you watched a movie, I think it's on Netflix, The Red Sea Diving Resort. He's got a major role in that movie, actually. So, so he's in some things. Nathan Darrow, if you watched the TV series House of Cards, has a recurring role in House of Cards. So
One of them was in Disobedience.
okay, I'm not sure which. I want to say Nivola maybe, but
Maybe.
I don't remember that. So the actor playing a smaller part, Bernie Madoff's brother, Peter Michael Kostroff, plays he's a regular in a TV series called The Wire, which a number of people consider to be one of the greatest television series ever. And he plays a totally unredeemable Jewish character in the movie. He's a horrific character called Maury Levy, an attorney in this gritty drama about drugs on the streets in The Wire, that made the careers of many other folks. He's also appeared in the TV series Billions, which just finished its run this week. And he's got a role in The Plot Against America, the miniseries based on work by Philip Roth. Right. So he is Jewish. He's the of all the actors in this so it's playing Jewish characters. Only Michael Kostroff, I think, actually is Jewish from what I could find on the internet. Hank Azaria returns 2 weeks in a row. I mean, he's part of the link between the movie Norman that we watched last week and The Wizard of Lies this week. Is Hank Azaria appearing in both of them? I mentioned last week that Hank Azaria actually is Jewish of Greek Jewish descent, Greek Jews who mostly came to Greece from Spain in 1492. So that's his heritage. But the character he's playing in this movie is not Jewish, right? I mean, he plays a Jewish character in Norman, but here he's Frank Di Pasquale, so an Italian character. So pretty interesting character actor and voice actor. So we talked about him a bit last week. From his many voices in The Simpsons. He had a recurring role in The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel for a while, and of course on Broadway in Spamalot, and in movies like The Birdcage and TV shows like Brockmire. So
I just saw Killers of the Flower Moon, which is Scorsese, De Niro, and Hank Azaria.
Yeah,
and I know that they all, both, I think De Niro and Scorsese like working with like a set group.
Yeah. So I mean, he is he's a true character actor, right? Who rarely plays a lead in anything, but other than that Brockmire TV series, I can't think of the one where he's actually the lead. But so it is a terrific cast. It's I mentioned that Barry Levinson is the director. I think it's also important to note that the main it's credited to 3 different screenwriters working together. By the way, all 3 of them Jews, I think. Sam Levinson, John Burnham Schwartz, and Samuel Baum. But the one in particular that I want to mention, who is billed first, so that usually means the primary of the writers, is Sam Levinson, who is Barry Levinson's son. So we have a movie that in many ways revolves around the relationship between a father and sons. And it's made by a director writing combination of father and son. There's been a lot written in recent years about Nepo babies in Hollywood in particular, the children of actors and directors becoming actors and directors themselves. Sometimes you can see that there's real favoritism there. Sam Levinson has made a couple of TV shows that have become very popular on their own. The merits maybe, it depends on your taste, but he created the TV series Euphoria and a show called The Idol that have both had a good run on TV in the last few years. So he does have some accomplishments to his credit, besides being the son of Barry Levinson. But I do think that it's potent and interesting to think about the father and son team at the heart of this movie that in many ways revolves around the relationship of a father and sons. So I think that's worth thinking about. So
he also did Euphoria, which I'm going to say this group probably hasn't seen, on HBO,
right,
which was
I mentioned
an Israeli series.
I'm sorry, it's based on an Israeli series?
Uh-huh.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
So
I tried to watch it. It's really, I couldn't.
Okay. Yeah.
For whatever that's worth.
So let's talk about the film some. So I think and I love the comparison between this and Norman. So I want you to think about that, right? And by comparison, Norman is bright colors. I mentioned last week that it's this sort of hodgepodge of styles. Everything but the kitchen sink is sort of thrown into the mix in the way the camera moves, and these montages of faces and things like that make up Norman, and the jaunty music, kind of jazzy klezmery music of Norman. I'm in some ways, this movie then is the anti-Norman, right? It's completely different stylistically from Norman. It definitely has technique, and I would say, but the technique, like everything else in this movie, is harnessed, right, in a way that in Norman it's wild, right? I mean, think about all those shots in Norman of the shoes, right? I mean, that the feet walking in, the shoes that he buys. I mean, right, that symbol that comes back over and over, right? There's a kind of a playfulness to that. And there is not much, if anything, in this movie that I would consider to be playful. And the colors themselves in the movie are muted, right? In Norman, there's kind of a color saturation of it. I mean, there's kind of beautiful brown wood, that feels very warm in Norman in a way. Right. And here, all of that has turned to like prison colors, kind of drab and gray, dark. And the movie gets, I think it gets darker as it goes too. So the one sort of scene with that seems to be really full of light is the scene of this party that the Madoffs throw, on the house in Montauk, I think, right? Where you get to see a couple of places where you get to see Bernie Madoff schmoozing, and in that first scene, there's like a burst of kind of color to it, And then the second one of those parties, which do I remember right, is in Florida, actually, in Palm Beach, where he's trying to find new investors to keep things afloat. Is the color has desaturated, right? So the sort of playful camera angles and things like that. The most common thing in this movie, The Wizard of Oz, is these extreme close-ups of Bernie Madoff's face, right? I mean, not even his whole face, right? It'll get right in and focus in right on his eyes behind his glasses. And yeah, I think these things are deliberate choices that a director makes, and the glasses themselves tend to be more things are reflected in the glass, so you don't actually see into Bernie Madoff's eyes, right? You see a reflection from his face, rather than seeing, we talk about the eyes being the windows of the soul. I think the movie shows us his eyes and never shows us behind them, right? And I think that's both about our inability to understand what makes a guy like him tick, but also his own inability to sort of own up to his own misdeeds, right? By the way, mentioned the reporter, Diana Henriquez, is the actual reporter, right? That's not an actress playing her in the movie. So she's the voiceover at the beginning where she talks about visiting Bernie Madoff in prison, that she'd been covering the scandal for a long time. And that whole interview, of course, is the framing device of the movie. So we begin at the prison, we end at the prison. We begin with Bernie Madoff walking into the interview, since we end with him walking away from the interview. But in this interview, he doesn't really come to terms with what he's done. Not really. When he apologizes to his victims in court, again, the camera kind of zooms in onto his face, onto those glasses. There is not, there aren't tears. I mean, we don't see any of that stuff, right? So I think those choices are really fascinating. I see Sandy has a hand up, I think.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that between the makeup, the camera work, and De Niro, I didn't even realize I was looking at De Niro through the whole movie. I really saw Bernie Madoff in front of me. It just was so perfect the way they did that.
Yeah, and I think that's a fascinating thing as well. I mean, sure, it's technique and it's all of those things, but it's these two actors that were in a sense, you can't watch these movies and not compare Richard Gere and Robert De Niro. And last week I mentioned that I think of Richard Gere as being in the mold of like a Cary Grant. You never see a movie with Richard Gere in it that you aren't aware that Richard Gere is in it. And I don't, I love Cary Grant. I love Richard Gere. I think they both make being a movie star look easy. Paul Newman was another guy who kind of, made it look easy, right? And De Niro, on the other hand, as much as this is sort of a piece with other De Niro roles, like the, Jake LaMotta in Raging Bull, or something, self-deluded, capable of violence, in this case more verbal than physical, but it's of a piece with other Robert De Niro kind of roles. But at the same time, De Niro disappears into roles in a way that I don't think Richard Gere does. You may disagree. I mean, we can disagree about some of this stuff, but I really think Richard Gere is always Richard Gere, and Robert De Niro is, while as he's gotten older, some of those things have become sort of tropes, I suppose, for him. But I think you're right. It's like looking at Bernie Madoff. I can't imagine Richard Gere playing this part.
No.
So I think that's interesting. Neil wants to disagree with me, though. I saw him. Which part of it do you want to disagree with, all of that or just some of it? You can unmute.
While he's unmuting, there's a lot of actors. Brad Pitt. When Brad Pitt's in a movie, you're like, oh yeah, that's Brad Pitt. But not
Which is not in any way diminishing what they do,
No,
right? I
no.
love those guys.
right.
I can see your point, but I couldn't disagree with you more. I thought the one, as we were watching the movie last week, I was thinking that Robert De Niro would have been good in this role too. But I think of them both as glamorous actors that amazingly disappeared into the role of playing mediocre people that almost weren't there. I think of Richard Gere, when he was like the young Studley guy stealing a Porsche. And I think of Robert De Niro as being this threatening criminal type. And here, these guys were milquetoast.
Real what?
I said they were milquetoast.
Oh, milquetoast.
Yeah. That's great acting.
Yeah. And maybe I could see Robert De Niro playing Norman. I really have trouble seeing Richard Gere playing Bernie Madoff, but I don't know. I just they're different, they're just different actors in that way, right? And I don't mean to denigrate either of them. I think they're, Hollywood has always had these two kinds of actors. I mean, these actors that sort of disappear into a role, and actors who are always themselves in a role. And there's beauty in both of those things. Linda?
Yeah, I'd love you to address some of his idiosyncrasies in the movie that I thought they tried to bring out. Like, he would change from being a nice guy to all of a sudden have this blow up personality, or how he was doing his louvers in his office, measuring them, or being very particular about the dirt on the wall. And I thought it had to do with his personality. And the other thing I wanted to bring out was, and I'm not trying to bring politics into this, but he had no social contact. I mean, he never thought he did anything wrong. That's what I found at the end of it, is that he didn't see that he did anything wrong, and he blamed it on everybody else.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to make those observations and wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, well, I think for sure, I mean, that's, he blames other people's greed for his actions, right? They're all to blame. The biggest Ponzi scheme in history. $65 billion are involved. It's extraordinary. So, and all of that he blames on somebody else, right? He'd been doing it for 15 years, I think, when he got caught. Now, there's some blame to go around, right? The SEC certainly deserves some blame. At one point when they ask him for this account number and he gives them the number and they don't look. That's a true story. That's a true, on the other hand, he was so respected in his field. Right. I mean, at one point, they ask his sons, how did you not know? And, he lists sort of his father's accomplishments, all the different boards, I mean, essentially creating NASDAQ. And, just these remarkable things that he actually did that caused everybody to look the other way. Right. So, but you're absolutely right. I mean, so the second part that you mentioned, it's his inability to see that he'd done anything wrong. We get to the end of the movie and Diana Henriquez says, you were throwing your children under the bus, right? How did you think this was going to end? Right. There may have been a part early on in this scheme, and he kind of speaks to it, that, he thought, well, yeah, I was robbing Peter to pay Paul for a little bit, but I would get it back onto the straight and narrow at some point. And then at some point, it just gets too big for that. And there's nothing I can do but take in more money to make it look like, we're actually investing and this. So I think that the movie plays a lot with what people know and what they should know, right? This goes to his wife and sons too, right? And the movie makes a pretty plausible case that he didn't tell them anything. But it also makes the case that it's implausible that they didn't know.
They didn't want to know.
Yeah.
I don't think they wanted to know.
Right. So we look away from those things. So,
What did you think of this was towards the end, where somebody compares him to one of the mass murderers. And he said,
Yeah.
how can you, he said, I didn't kill anybody. How can you compare me to,
Ted
Right.
Bundy.
Yeah, Ted, thank you.
Bundy. Right.
Yeah.
And that, by the way, is true. I mean, that article actually exists comparing him to
Uh-huh.
Ted Bundy. And Diana Enriquez actually asked him about it. It's in her book, right? And he's angry that he's being compared to a murderer because he didn't murder anybody, but failing to recognize that what they're really saying is that he is a sociopath who doesn't value human life in the same way that Ted Bundy doesn't, right?
And who knows, maybe some of the people that he swindled out of these vast sums of money, maybe they actually killed themselves as a result of what he did. So,
well, his son did, and
Yeah.
so did others, right? There's no question. And others, truly became impoverished as a result, homeless, his own wife, right? Took everything from her, and she ends up living with the sister who was essentially bankrupted by him too. So
even
they
Ellie
mentioned-
was,
Right, Ellie Wiesel.
even Ellie
yeah,
was
even
out,
Elie Wiesel. They mentioned Elie Wiesel a couple of times in this.
yeah.
But there were a whole bunch of Jewish charitable organizations that were hurt very badly by having invested money with Bernie Madoff.
I don't know if you know,
The list,
Hadassah was paid back though, somehow.
listen, the list goes on and on. I mean, it was billions of dollars. It's just.
And there was sort of an element of, at least within the Jewish community, here is this Jewish guy, Bernie Madoff, making all this money for Jewish organizations. People were falling all over themselves to try and get into his fund. So, particularly in New York, but I think around the whole country. Elaine, I think you were kind of waving. So-
Yeah, in reply to Linda said she wanted to keep politics out of it. I don't think we can because there's too many parallels today about Trump's sons are testifying today about that they did not know, or I don't know what they're going to say, but that he was involved in their businesses. And the parallels are pretty similar.
Oh,
Right.
yeah.
But I only heard a minute of the news early this morning about that, but just that they were predicting that Donald Trump Jr.'s defense is going to be, yes, I signed these papers, but I didn't read them.
Yeah.
And that's an exact parallel to
Yeah.
Madoff in that sense, right? Now, this movie asks us to be sympathetic to those sons, I think, and we do feel for them, and they do have they seem to have genuine emotions, but they're also that they should have known, right? I think the movie argues, and they
that he
certainly-
says he didn't do anything wrong. Same
Right.
thing. That he didn't do anything wrong.
Right. So
I'm just glad they
they're
didn't-
certainly beneficiaries of all that went on,
Right.
right? The
When they show,
talking about multi-million-dollar houses and
Yeah.
and they just talk together about we can get the price down to 5 million and something like that.
they show Andrew when he has cancer speaking, which was ballsy to go speak at a college.
Right.
And he said, I'm not a sympathetic figure. I'm glad they didn't play up the Jewish part.
Now, I would say that this is a hallmark of Barry Levinson in some ways, right? If you go back to his early movies like Diner and Avalon, right? Avalon is a story of an immigrant family, becoming more affluent and more successful in the United States. You are hard pressed to find anything in that movie that marks the family as being Jewish, right? They don't say words in Yiddish. They don't go to temple. The movie is based around two American holidays, Thanksgiving and 4th of July, right? Those are the two times a year that the family gets together, and you see over the course of a generation how, sort of the cousins club from the beginning of the movie to people sitting alone in their own dining rooms at the end of the movie, right? But those characters are so I've read stories that certainly Jews seeing that movie, we recognize those people, right, as Jewish. But I've also read stories that Italians go to that movie and think they're all Italian, and Greeks go to that movie and think that they're all Greek, right? And in his first movie, Diner, the same thing. There's no Yiddish. There's nothing Jewish about these characters overtly. They all felt like the friends I grew up with, right? And there's nothing overtly Jewish in Diner until the last scene where you actually see the wedding and there's people wearing kippot and a rabbi performing the ceremony. But up till then, they don't really, so I would say that, and some of his other movies, even more like Tin Men, there are Jewish characters who aren't identified on screen as being Jewish. Maybe even Rain Man, for that matter. Bugsy. We watched Bugsy. I mean, he's definitely Jewish, and they mention it, but that it's not it's not a movie about Jews, right? And neither is this, even though there's occasionally a little bit of Yiddish. There's a word Ruth says at some point, she feels like a putz, which is a kind of a funny choice actually of words. But other than that, I mean, there's very little identifying it, right? Which I do think is a hallmark of Levinson. Part of it is to say we Jews are Americans. We're part of the fabric of the nation. It's nice that this movie is not made by an overt anti-Semite. It would be a very different movie. And it's certainly, I think maybe only Jews or Jews and anti-Semites, right? We're the ones who read the headlines and say, well, thank God that one isn't Jewish. We're happy this one is Jewish. God, what a shanda that Bernie Madoff is Jewish, right? For us. Yeah, Linda.
I went on, I didn't see the movie last week, but I have two questions for you. One, what is going to be the theme of this season's movies? I saw next week's movie, and I was trying to find what the theme of this season's movies are.
The class as a whole doesn't have a theme, but I like to show these movies in pairs. So Norman that some of us saw last week and this one are a pair, right?
Okay.
The next two are also a pair.
Okay.
The third and the fourth pair. So in all of them, I mean, really, what unifies any of this? These are images of Jews in motion pictures.
I have a question about what was I going to say now? Now I'm losing my train of thought. I Googled and I did some reviews online to find out about Bernie Madoff and his wife Ruth. And nowhere in there do they mention that he was Jewish. They talk about his parents being immigrants and about his life, but they never mention that he was Jewish. So I was just wondering if that was just a given, or if they just didn't mention it.
Well, I would say, look, some people would say that this is the power of the Jews in media, that when there is such a negative example of a Jew on Wall Street, that we managed to keep it out of the press, right?
Right.
You know, you can't keep the story out of the press, but the Jewishness of him, right? Now, so that would be one way to read that. I would also say that the Jewishness was not an important part of his life, really.
Yeah.
Right. And I'd like to think that people who are closer to their faith could not do what he did. I can't swear to that. I would like that to be true. That, but some of that may just be a matter of scale, right? This came up in a generation before Bernie Madoff with the insider trading scandals. Remember Ivan Boesky? Remember that name? And Boesky had given a whole lot of money to the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York to build a library and have it named after him, the Boesky Library, and became an issue in the press. What was Jewish Theological Seminary going to do with that donation and with the naming and all of that kind of stuff? So you actually have people who have been pretty active in the Jewish community who still engaged in criminal behavior, let's say. Yeah.
Bob and I have to leave the house, so I apologize for that. But I just want to comment that in the past year or so, there was somebody in the Orthodox community, like a Black Hatter Orthodox in New Jersey or someplace out east, who did something very similar, who was some big something, and I don't know the whole story accurately, but there he was, and of course it's an embarrassment and a shanda. And I also observed, I can't help but noticing that this was unusual, that they didn't point out, like in articles too, that Linda was saying that he was Jewish, but so often you do see that it's pointed out that somebody is Jewish. But naive of me to say, but when somebody does something terrible who's Christian, and they never point out that he's Christian, you will never see that. Anyhow, this was great. I'm sorry we have to miss the rest. The movie was terrific.
Yeah, I'm that it's an interesting point, right? And actually, as Jews, we sort of, on the one hand, we want to say, look how many Jews have won the Nobel Prize, right?
Yeah.
Look how many great Jews there are. Some of that, I guess, is to counteract the negative, stereotypes of anti-Semitism and things like that. But it's also, that's how we view the world, right? We have this sort of running scorecard in our head, right? Good Jews, bad Jews. We hope there's a lot more good Jews, right? But there's, so when these show up, I mean, I'm not sure which guy you mean in New Jersey, but there was one a few years ago that was involved in like black market organs for transplant. I mean, it was really crazy, ugly. So I wish I could say that coming to synagogues is an inoculation against doing anything wrong. I wish it was.
Julie, we're recording. I'm happy to send it to you, and you can watch the last 15 minutes.
That would be great. Thank you.
Evie.
Yeah, I was just going to add on to what Julie and Linda, I think it was Linda that was saying too, because I remember back in the Ivan Boesky era, where I think maybe some plaques were removed, maybe from the seminary or from some places, and the idea of trade contributions. But there was also something about 5 years ago, I think, in the kashrut meat world where there were
Yeah.
things that were not so kosher.
Right,
Why,
the Postville, Iowa.
Pardon me?
Postville, Iowa
Oh, yeah.
was
Wow.
like a kosher Jewish factory farm that was using illegal immigrant labor and mistreating their employees, but they were using the right knife to kill the cattle.
Oh, well.
Yeah, I think that unfortunately there are these issues that kind of pop up all the time, and I think we need to be aware of them, but on the other hand, it's so much of a judgment issue in terms of, does the good outweigh the bad? I don't know, but the contributions and where they come from, that is something that bothers me, especially when it's attributed positively and there's such
Yeah,
negativity involved.
absolutely. Well,
But I'll
there
try to-
is no Boesky Library.
Maybe?
So I believe they gave the entire contribution, before they were required by law to return it to people who had been defrauded. They returned it. But I thought the interesting thing in that story was that Boesky started coming to Torah study they invited him while he was indicted and going through trial to come and study Torah at the Jewish Theological Seminary. So they wouldn't take his money, and they didn't name the library after him, but they were interested in his atonement. So, which is an interesting, right? We have a tradition of atonement in our tradition. So can you atone? Can somebody like a Bernie Madoff, given the chance, is there any way to atone?
No.
You get to a point where the crime is so big, a kid steals a candy bar from the local drugstore, you can atone for that, right? I mean, it's not a big deal. $65 billion and hurting people, some of whose, not only the people who lost their fortunes lose when something like this happens, anybody who's invested in the market loses in a certain sense, right? So certainly that was true with the insider trading and Ivan Boesky. It hurts everybody, even people who don't have anything to do with them. Yeah, Neil.
I actually researched this a couple of days ago. When we're talking about a film, I hate to mess it up with reality, but remember the guy that they hired that had recovered $1 billion? Eventually, he had recovered, and they returned 88% of the money. So, quite honestly, I've lost more money in the market the last 3 years than the 12% that they've lost. But one of the more interesting things when we talk about the culpability of his sons, they went to a lot of the rich people who had been getting payments from him during the last decade and asked for the money back, not all of it, but the interest. And they all said, well, we didn't know, but the point was, he said, no, you guys had to know something was wrong, that you just didn't say anything, and everybody ended up giving the money back, the interest. So there's some credibility to this culpability of his sons, or lack of culpability, I should say.
I don't think the movie, I think the movie plays in shades of gray, right? Like I said, did they know? The fact that he took a guilty plea makes it so that they never had to testify, right? So they never had to go into a court of law and say whether they knew or didn't know, right? So there are still people who believe that they knew every bit of it, and there are others who believe that they didn't. I think it's, the movie doesn't exactly come down on one side or the other, except to say that you should know. If things are too good to be true, they're probably not true, right? And I think most of us know that, but it's also pretty easy to get suckered into something, So, and look the other way, right?
Arthur and I were discussing the movie because you know, he didn't watch it with me, but I'm like, look how much, you know, De Niro looks like Madoff, and look at this and look at this. And then he finally said, when something's too good to be true, exactly what you just said.
Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
you have to question it. You have to like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
So-
Yeah.
And there are times during it where like, oh, I feel bad. Then you're like, wait a minute, he was a thief. And then when they show all the opulence that he lived in at the end, that's
Mm.
just mind blowing.
Yeah.
And look, it's to the movie's credit that reminds you all along that this is a human being,
Yes.
because it reminds us of what human beings are capable of. You know, and it also reminds us that even when people do something horrible, they're still human beings, right? So that's, you know, it's a really beautiful thing to learn. Right?
Although his son says when he's at that college, you know, interview thing, someone said, what's your relationship with your father? My father's dead to me.
Right.
Oh.
Yeah. Which I think is an interesting thing to say because he was dying when he said it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, he's dead to his father too.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think, you know, there are these moments, each son gets a moment like that. The other one was the moment where his brother sits down and is writing and he reads what he's written to his wife. And, you know, what can I say to my child when he asks about his grandfather? You know, if I say he was evil, and then the movie doesn't finish the sentence, you know, what do I say about me, right? You know.
And do you think that Joy Behar clip, I thought how they, you know, every time they did something, which I assume was, you know, from real, but then they'd put in De Niro's, you know, face. It was just, it was a good movie.
Thanks for bringing that up. I wanted to mention that. So I'm talking about the kitchen sink in Norman, you know, all the different camera angles and things like that. A very showy movie. And here it's easy to miss all of that, you know, extraordinary craftsmanship, let's say, of inserting De Niro as Bernie Madoff into all of these clips, right? And so using real footage from CNN or Financial News Network or, you know, Network News or 60 Minutes, right? All of these things are used in the movie, and in every one, the carefully and seamlessly inserting members of the movie's cast into those things. It's you know, it's an extraordinary piece of work.
And that's the good thing about watching something on video. You can stop it.
Yeah.
It's like, what? And, you know, anyway.
And then you also have this,
interesting. His wife at the end, she didn't have a friend left. I mean, she's still living. She's still living in Florida.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, so it's a pretty remarkable movie in a lot of ways. I mean, I'd say when you look back on this, you're probably more likely to think of Norman with some hope in your heart. You know, I like these as sort of opposites, right? All Norman really wants to do is help people. I mean, that is really his goal. He may be just as what's the word I want? Self-aware. He may be just what's the opposite of self-aware?
Unreflective, unself-aware.
Yeah, right. So
Clueless.
he and Madoff are equally clueless about themselves in some way, why they do what they do. But the two of them are complete opposites, and right? You know, Norman cannot help himself from talking to the investigator. I mean, he does. I just want to introduce you to this one or that one, the other one. Why? I just want you to be happy. I just right. Now, he wants to make money, he wants his percentage and all that stuff. But he's driven by this need to make others happy. Right. And you know, Madoff is so not that guy. The fact that people made money, you know, and got money from him, I don't think is what drove him, right?
Well,
Neil wants to disagree again.
yeah, yeah, it's obnoxious, and I keep disagreeing.
No,
But
it's all right. I don't mind.
yeah, but I'm paying attention. You know, one of the interesting things about Bernie Madoff was he never bought anything. And you know, he said in the film, or the film said, all he wanted to do was make people happy. And they, you know, the investigators asked him, why didn't you buy anything at all? And he said he was terrified of losing money for other people. I mean, he was just filled with contradictions.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a very, you know, but so I don't think, so what does drive him? I mean, the movie doesn't really ever tell us because he doesn't know. Right. I mean, in some sense, you know, the movie makes a case that he's a true sociopath, right? I mean, it's not about feeling or empathy or any of these things. It is maybe about power, maybe about prestige, right? I mean, things that he certainly liked having, you know, but there is no real, there's no explanation for him.
Do you remember how Norman, he loved these shoes that he bought the Israeli?
Yeah, right.
He loved really fine, he knew fine things. Well, Madoff, if you remember, every time it showed his closet, he had beautiful taste.
Yeah.
He had lovely ties and shirts, and he had
All the watches,
yes,
all her jewelry.
and it was all in good taste. He really had beautiful taste.
Yeah, right. Well, you know, look, and it's all part of a charade, right? You know, so to
Linda?
look, to look.
I have a question, and I'm gonna throw it out to everyone. On the 17th floor, we have the fella that was keeping the books for him, really.
Yeah, Frank.
And what
Frank
happened
was
to
on it.
him? Do we know what happened to him?
Well, the movie doesn't tell us. Maybe someone online has looked him up.
I don't know. That's what I was wondering. What happened to that
I'm
character?
on it. I'm on it.
And I think he may be a little bit of a composite character too. I'm not sure. So I do like early in the movie where they show the 17th floor versus the rest of the Madoff enterprise. Did you notice
Right.
that, you know, everything on the other floor is sort of cool and organized and austere. And then you get to the 17th floor and it's like a bunch of people sitting, there's like papers everywhere and there's boxes all, you know, it's a total mess by comparison. And I think that's an interesting comparison of the 17th floor to the rest of the business, which goes to, again, the Sons not really knowing. You know, so in fact that he didn't act, the Sons had never actually been on the 17th floor, according to this movie.
So here's Frank de Pasquale. He was, according to Wikipedia, American fraudster and financier who was the key lieutenant of Bernie Madoff for 3 decades.
Okay.
And what
There's
happened?
a
There's a 4-part documentary on cable about Madoff, and we watched all 4 parts in one night. We just couldn't turn it off. It was mesmerizing.
There is, by the way, another Madoff movie with Richard Dreyfuss playing the part.
No, it's not
So,
that one.
He died, Frank died of cancer in 2016.
Okay.
Wow. Okay.
He was
So
58.
he never went to jail then.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'll find out.
I would have thought he would.
Yeah,
Even-
wasn't he sort of the enforcer? I mean, he took orders from Bernie, but he did the stuff.
Right. So I didn't know if he had any culpability in it.
He died of lung cancer while awaiting sentencing.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
okay.
All right. He showed them.
Well, right,
Um,
well,
Go ahead.
next week we're watching So You Are So Not Invited to My Bat Mitzvah. Lighter. I don't know if you'll enjoy it. I'll be interested in hearing what you have to say about it.
I
So,
liked it.
Yeah.
Thought it was very appropriate. I had just gone to a bat mitzvah the week before I saw it. And when I watched it, I thought, because when I was at the bat mitzvah, I couldn't believe it was so over the top. And then I saw the movie and I thought, well, this is what it's like.
And then
And
the
now
next
I'm-
one, yeah,
and
and
now I'm-
that's paired with, and Linda, you asked about themes, Keeping Up with the Steins. Another, I love both these movies, and I'm glad they're a little lighter.
Okay.
Yeah. I do try to balance the dark and the light when we do these movies a little bit, so that I shouldn't leave you always with darkness. You know. But thank you very much. It's a pleasure to see you all, and
Right.
look forward to seeing you next week.
Right. I still have 1 minute. 1 minute on the clock. Rabbi Josh Fagelson is going to be here this Sunday, Lox and Bagels, 9:30. And it's Eternal Questions. It's about Parshat HaShavua, Torah portion of the week. He's a really interesting guy. I think you really like them. And next week is Jim Kenny. So that'll be virtual. So, just watch your Macomb at home. There's a lot of fun things. And then November 19th, we have a field trip to Goodwill,
Good Hope, Free
Good
Will.
Hope, Free Will. I don't know why I can't get
It's
that.
really hard. Good Hope Free Will Baptist Church. This is the group that came and joined us on Juneteenth.
Where is it?
They've invited us to go down to East Garfield Park and
Right.
see them. And we're arranging a bus so you don't have to drive down there and find parking on the street in East Garfield Park. So I encourage you to come here and join in the bus ride. Vanessa will be bus captain that day because I'm actually going down early to teach at the church. So
We'll have snacks.
Oh, okay.
Do we have to sign up for the bus?
Yes, you do.
Can I tell you right now, we want to
No,
go?
I mean, I think you should look at the registration. It's a long day. We're leaving here at 10 to 10. We won't be back till 3. So I think just take a look at it and then sign up. And after you look at it, if you can't find the sign up thing, email me.
okay, take care,
All right.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.
Bye.